The tribute demand arrived on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I was supposed to be off work, and instead I spent it watching the most powerful empire in the galaxy tell humanity to hand over a third of everything we made forever, or be destroyed. And I remember the exact words of Earth's final reply, because I was in the room when it was decided, and because those words changed the shape of the galaxy. They were not the words anyone expected. They were not defiance, and they were not surrender. They were something nobody had ever tried before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell it the way it happened. My name is Daniel Akafer, and I was a junior analyst at Earth's Office of Extrasolar Affairs, which is a grand name for a small department that, before that Tuesday, mostly filed reports nobody read. We were the people who handled humanity's tiny, careful relationship with the wider galaxy. And on that Tuesday, we became the people who had to decide whether humanity lived or died. You have to understand where humanity stood, because the whole story turns on how small we were. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for about 30 years. We were new, and we were minor, and we knew it. The galaxy was run by the sovereignty, an ancient hegemony of the great old species, thousands of years of accumulated power, hundreds of member worlds, a civilization so vast and so established that a young species like humanity barely registered. We weren't a player. We were a guest, admitted on sufferance, allowed a small seat at the edge of a very long table, grateful for the scraps of trade and protection that membership offered. And the sovereignty ran on tribute. That was the thing we'd learned in our 30 years, the thing that sat under the whole glittering surface of galactic civilization. The sovereignty's hundreds of member worlds weren't equals. They were tiers. The great old species at the top, and beneath them in descending ranks everyone else, and the lower you were, the more you paid. Tribute. A share of everything you produced, flowing upward world to world, rank to rank, all of it ultimately feeding the great powers at the top. It was the engine of the whole sovereignty, the strong taxing the weak forever, the price of protection and membership and being allowed to exist in the great powers galaxy. Humanity, as the newest and lowest member, had paid a small tribute from the start. A token, really. We were too minor to be worth much, and the sovereignty had mostly ignored us, taking its small cut and leaving us alone. We'd accepted it. What choice did we have? It was the cost of membership, and membership kept us safe, and we were too small and too new to do anything but pay and be grateful. For 30 years, that was the arrangement. Humanity paid its small tribute and kept its head down and was left alone. And then humanity found the Cascade. The Cascade was a thing humanity discovered, a breakthrough, a technology, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understood the science even at the time. What matters is what it did. The Cascade was a method of energy generation so efficient, so clean, so far beyond anything the sovereignty had, that it changed everything humanity could do almost overnight. Within a few years of the discovery, Earth went from a minor backwater to one of the most productive worlds in the galaxy. Not the most powerful, we had no fleet, no empire, no military worth the name, but the most productive. The Cascade meant we could make more, build more, generate more wealth and energy and resources than worlds 100 times our size and age. It was a miracle. It should have been a miracle, and in a fair galaxy it would have been. But the sovereignty didn't run on fair. It ran on tribute. And the moment humanity became wildly productive, the moment Earth started generating real wealth, the sovereignty's attention turned to us for the first time in 30 years, not with congratulation, but with appetite. Because the sovereignty's whole logic was that the productive pay tribute, and humanity had just become very, very productive, and a productive world that paid only a token tribute was, to the sovereignty, an intolerable inefficiency, a resource not being properly extracted. So they sent the demand, the big one, the real one. The demand came directly from the sovereignty's high court, the apex, the great powers themselves, not some regional administrator. That alone told us how serious it was. The High Court did not address minor worlds directly. They had now. It was delivered to Earth by a sovereignty envoy, a being of one of the great old species, who arrived with the cold ceremony of an empire that had never once been refused. And the demand, translated into clean human language, was this. Humanity's tribute was to be raised, effective immediately, from the token we've been paying to a full third of everything Earth produced, a third of the Cascade's output, a third of our energy, a third of our wealth, a third of everything forever, flowing upward to the sovereignty. The envoy presented it not as a negotiation, but as a correction, a long overdue adjustment to bring humanity's tribute in line with humanity's new productivity. The sovereignty had been generous, the envoy explained, in letting us pay so little for so long. That generosity was now ended. We would pay our proper share like every other productive world, a third of everything in perpetuity. And if we refused, the envoy was very calm about this part, the sovereignty would simply take it. Earth had no fleet, no defenses worth the name. The sovereignty had the most powerful military in the galaxy. Refusal was not really an option. It was merely a choice between paying the tribute and being conquered, and then paying the tribute anyway, minus our freedom and a great many lives. The envoy laid this out with the patient certainty of a being who had delivered this same demand to 100 worlds and never once been refused, because refusal was insane, because the math was the math, because you do not defy the most powerful empire in the galaxy when you have no fleet and they have everything. You have 30 days to accept, the envoy said. I would advise you to use perhaps an hour. The terms are not negotiable and your situation is not ambiguous. You will pay a third of everything forever or you will be made to. The sovereignty has been patient with your young species. Do not mistake patience for weakness. Accept the tribute and prosper as a productive member of the galaxy. Refuse and be reminded why the sovereignty has ruled for 10,000 years. The envoy rose. 30 days, though again, an hour would be wiser. I was in the office when the demand came down, and I watched humanity's leadership receive it. And I want to tell you what those 30 days were actually like, because the histories compress them into a single dramatic decision, and they were not that. They were 30 days of the worst arguments humanity ever had with itself. Because there was a faction, a large one, a reasonable one that wanted to pay. I need to be fair to them because the story usually makes them cowards and they weren't. They were realists. Their argument was simple and it was strong. We had no fleet. The sovereignty had everything. A third of everything was a catastrophe, yes, an injustice, yes, but it was survivable. We'd still have 2/3. We'd still be productive, still be wealthy, still be alive. Pay the tribute, this faction argued, and humanity survives, diminished but whole, free to keep building, keep growing, and maybe someday, in a century, in 5 centuries, strong enough to renegotiate from a position of actual power. Refuse, and we die. It was that simple. Pay and live as a tributary or refuse and be conquered. Any sane species pays. Every sane species had paid for 10,000 years. The tribute was unjust, but the alternative was annihilation, and you do not choose annihilation over injustice. You pay, you survive, you endure, you wait for a better day. It was a good argument, I want to stress that. It was the reasonable argument, the sane one, the one that any rational analysis supported. Pay the tribute, live, wait. And it was a young woman named Sarah Chen who stood up against it, and changed everything. And she wasn't even supposed to be in the room. Sarah Chen was an economist. Not a general, not a diplomat, not a leader, an economist, a specialist in the office who studied the flows of galactic trade and tribute, the kind of person who understood the sovereignty's economy better than almost anyone on Earth. She'd been brought into the leadership's deliberations to explain the financial impact of the tribute demand, to put numbers on the catastrophe. She was supposed to give a technical briefing and sit down. Instead, she gave the briefing, and then she didn't sit down, and what she said changed the shape of the galaxy. "Everyone in this room is having the wrong argument," she said. "You're arguing about whether to pay the tribute or refuse it, pay and survive, or refuse and die. And you're all assuming those are the only two options and that the choice is about courage, whether we're brave enough to refuse or wise enough to pay." She shook her head. "But I've spent my career studying the sovereignty's economy, and I'm telling you, you're missing the actual situation. You're thinking like a small world facing a big empire. You need to think like an economist. And as an economist, I'm looking at this demand and seeing something none of you are seeing." She pulled up her data, the flows of galactic tribute, the engine of the whole sovereignty. "Let me show you what the sovereignty actually is, and then let me show you what we actually have. Because the great powers just made a mistake, and it's a much bigger mistake than they understand. And if we're smart, not brave, smart, we can do something no world has ever done. We can refuse the tribute and survive, not by fighting them, by understanding them better than they understand themselves." The room went quiet. This was not the framing anyone expected. "The sovereignty runs on tribute," Sarah Chen said. "You all know that, but you're thinking of tribute as taxes, as the strong taking from the weak because they can. And that's not quite right. Tribute isn't just extraction, it's dependency. The great powers at the top of the sovereignty don't produce much anymore. They haven't for thousands of years. They're old and they're powerful and they sit at the top, and they live entirely on the tribute flowing up from below. The whole pyramid, hundreds of worlds, 10,000 years, exists to feed a tiny apex of great powers who produce almost nothing themselves and consume everything that flows up. They have the fleets. They have the military. But they don't have production. They gave that up long ago because why produce when you can take?" Her eyes were bright now. "And here's the mistake they just made, the mistake they don't even know they made. They looked at humanity, this minor world that suddenly became the most productive world in the galaxy because of the Cascade, and they decided to tax us properly. A third of everything. They think they're correcting an inefficiency." She paused. "But they just made the most productive world in the galaxy us, essential to their economy. They've spent 30 years ignoring us, and now, because of the Cascade, they want to make Earth a major tributary, a real pillar of the flow, which means they're about to become dependent on us, on Earth's production, on the Cascade. They're about to wire a third of Earth's output into the top of their pyramid." She looked around the room. "And you don't make yourself dependent on a world you can't actually control. You don't build your economy on a tributary that has the one thing you don't have and can't replicate. The great powers think the Cascade makes us a richer prize to tax. They have it exactly backwards. The Cascade makes us a thing they need, and a thing they need is a thing that has power over them, no matter how many fleets they have." I watched the room change as Sarah Chen talked. I watched the framing shift from "do we pay" or "do we die" to something else entirely. "So here's what I'm proposing," she said. "Not surrender, not defiance, something they have no defense against, because in 10,000 years no one has ever tried it, because no tributary world has ever had what we have." She took a breath. "We don't refuse the tribute and we don't pay it either. We do the third thing. We say yes, and then we make the saying yes mean something they never intended." She pulled up the Cascade data. "The sovereignty wants a third of Earth's output. Fine. We'll integrate Earth's production into the sovereignty's economy, deeply, completely, exactly as they're demanding. We'll make Earth essential. We'll make the Cascade the beating heart of the upper tier's economy, the thing 100 great power worlds come to depend on, woven so deep into the flow that they can't function without it." Her voice was steady and certain. "And then, once they depend on us, once Earth is the pillar holding up the top of their pyramid, then we have a conversation about tribute. Not from a position of weakness, a minor world begging a great empire. From a position of being the thing they can't live without. You can conquer a world that produces ore. You can't conquer the world that produces the energy your entire civilization now runs on, because the moment you damage it, you damage yourselves. The Cascade can't be taken by force. It's not a resource you can seize. It's a knowledge, a process, a thing that only works because humanity makes it work. They can conquer Earth. They cannot conquer the Cascade, and if they've made themselves dependent on the Cascade first, she let it hang, then conquering Earth becomes the one thing they can't afford to do. The room was silent. "That's the trap," Sarah Chen said quietly. "They think they're trapping us pay or die, but if we say yes and integrate and make ourselves essential, then we're trapping them. They'll have built their economy on a foundation only we can provide, and the moment they have, the tribute relationship inverts. They won't be taxing us. They'll be depending on us. And a galaxy's apex that depends on you is a galaxy's apex you have leverage over, fleets or no fleets." She looked at humanity's leadership. Earth's final reply to the tribute demand shouldn't be no. It should be yes, said in a way that turns the most powerful empire in the galaxy into our debtor without them realizing it's happening until it's far too late. They demanded we become essential to their economy. So let's become essential. And let's find out what it's worth to the great old powers when the world they were going to tax turns out to be the world they can't survive without. It took most of the 30 days to decide. The realists fought it hard. It was a gamble, a long and subtle gamble, and if Sarah Chen was wrong, if the great powers simply conquered us before the dependency took hold, then humanity would have thrown away the safe option of paying and died for an economist's clever theory. It was not a small risk. It was everything. But in the end, humanity's leadership chose Sarah Chen's path. Because the realists' option, pay a third forever, was a slow death too, a permanent subjugation with no way out, and humanity, it turned out, would rather gamble on a clever inversion than accept a comfortable cage. We chose the third thing. We chose to say yes, and to make the yes a trap. And on the 30th day, Earth gave its final reply to the sovereignty's tribute demand. And it was not the defiance the histories sometimes imagine, and it was not the surrender the realists wanted. It was Sarah Chen's inversion, delivered to the High Court's envoy in careful, humble, perfectly calculated language. Humanity accepts the sovereignty's tribute demand. We are honored to take our place as a productive pillar of the galactic economy. We will integrate Earth's full production, including the Cascade, into the sovereignty's flow, as deeply and completely as the great powers desire. We ask only the technical cooperation needed to weave our output fully into your economy, so that the sovereignty may enjoy the benefits of the Cascade to the greatest possible extent. The envoy was pleased. Of course the envoy was pleased. Humanity had submitted, quickly and gracefully and even eagerly, exactly as a minor world should. The envoy reported back to the High Court that the human matter was settled, the productive young world brought properly to heel, its riches now flowing up into the sovereignty where they belonged. A clean, easy correction, another tributary added to the pyramid. The great powers congratulated themselves on a productive new asset and turned their attention elsewhere, and never once noticed that they'd just begun wiring their entire civilization's economy to a foundation that only humanity controlled. Sarah Chen watched the envoy leave, and I stood beside her, and she said quietly, "There it is, the trap set. Now we just have to make ourselves essential before they realize what essential means." She let out a long breath. "They think they won today. They think they brought a minor world to heel." She almost smiled. "In about 10 years, they're going to discover that the day they made humanity essential to the sovereignty's economy was the day they handed the most powerful empire in the galaxy to the one species clever enough to take it. And by then, it'll be far too late to do anything but negotiate." The trap was set. Now it just had to spring. It took 8 years for the trap to mature, and they were the strangest 8 years of my life, because to the whole galaxy, including most of humanity, it looked like we'd surrendered. That was the hardest part, and Sarah Chen had warned us about it from the start. "The trap only works if it looks like submission," she'd said. "If we look defiant, they'll watch us, suspect us, keep us at arm's length. But if we look beaten, if we look like a minor world that paid its tribute and is grateful to be allowed to keep producing, they'll wire us in deep and never think twice." So we have to look conquered. We have to let the whole galaxy believe humanity bent the knee. And we have to endure being thought of as the species that rolled over for years, while the real thing grows underneath. That's the price. We win by looking like we lost for as long as it takes. And it was a real price. Those 8 years, humanity was a joke in the galaxy. The young world that talked big with its fancy new technology and then folded the instant the sovereignty squeezed. Other minor species, ones who'd paid their own tribute for centuries, looked at us with a kind of contempt because we'd had something special, the Cascade, and we'd handed a third of it over without a fight. Even among ourselves there was shame. Most of humanity didn't know about Sarah Chen's plan. It couldn't be widely known, or it would leak, and the whole thing depended on the sovereignty not understanding what was happening. So most humans genuinely believed we'd surrendered, and lived with the shame of it, and there was nothing the few of us who knew could say to comfort them. We had to let our own people think we were cowards for years to make the trap work. I want to honor that because it almost never gets honored. The hardest thing humanity did in this whole story wasn't the clever plan. It was enduring being thought weak by the galaxy and by ourselves for 8 long years, while the real thing grew in the dark, knowing we couldn't explain, couldn't defend ourselves, couldn't even tell our own people the truth. Sarah Chen carried that worst of all. She was, to most of humanity who knew her name, the economist who'd advised surrender, the woman who'd told Earth to bend the knee. She lived under that for 8 years, the architect of humanity's liberation believed to be the architect of its humiliation, and she never once defended herself, because defending herself would have risked the plan. That's a kind of strength the histories don't have a word for. Underneath the apparent surrender, the real work proceeded exactly as Sarah Chen had designed it. Humanity integrated, deeply, eagerly, completely, exactly as the sovereignty had demanded. We wove Earth's production into the galactic economy, and we made the Cascade available, and we did it all with the humble gratitude of a properly subjugated tributary. And the sovereignty, delighted with its productive new asset, did precisely what Sarah Chen had predicted. It built on us. The great powers, who produced nothing and lived on tribute, found that the Cascade's energy was better and cheaper and more abundant than anything in their 10,000-year economy, and they wanted more of it and more and more. The integration the sovereignty had demanded as a way to tax us became, year by year, the channel through which the Cascade flowed into the heart of galactic civilization. The upper tiers retooled around it. The great power worlds came to run on it. The whole apex of the sovereignty's economy, the part that produced nothing and consumed everything, gradually rebuilt itself on a foundation of human energy, because human energy was simply better, and the sovereignty had spent 10,000 years learning to take the best of everything and never once learning to ask what it would cost to depend on it. Sarah Chen tracked it all. The dependency graph, she called it, a map of exactly how deeply the sovereignty's economy had come to rely on the Cascade. And year by year, the map grew, the dependency deepened. The great powers wired themselves more and more completely to the one thing only humanity could provide. By year 5, a significant fraction of the upper sovereignty ran on the Cascade. By year 7, a majority. By year 8, the great power worlds at the very top of the pyramid, the ancient apex that ruled the galaxy, could not function without it. Their fleets, their cities, their entire glittering civilization, all of it now ran at the core on human energy. They had made themselves dependent, exactly as Sarah Chen said they would. They'd looked at a productive world and seen a thing to tax, and in taxing it, they'd wired their whole existence to it, and they'd never once seen the danger, because in 10,000 years of taking, it had never occurred to the great powers that the thing they took could ever have power over them. The trap was mature, now it just had to spring. And the springing of it, the moment of Earth's actual final reply, the decision that truly changed everything, that was the most delicate thing humanity ever did, because springing the trap wrong would have meant war, and we still had no fleet. Sarah Chen understood that the spring had to be perfect, and she spent the 8th year preparing it with a care that bordered on obsession. "The moment we reveal the trap," she said, "everything depends on how we do it. If we do it as a threat, give us what we want, or we cut off the Cascade, then we've declared economic war, and the great powers, even dependent, will fight. They'll try to seize Earth, take the Cascade by force, and even though they can't actually run it without us, they might destroy us trying, and a lot of people die, and maybe we lose. A threat triggers their fight response. We can't threaten." She shook her head. "And if we do it too softly, if we just ask nicely for a better deal, they'll refuse, because they don't yet understand they're dependent, and asking nicely doesn't make them understand. We have to make them understand the dependency, completely and undeniably, in a way that triggers not their fight response, but their self-preservation response. We have to make them realize all at once that they need us more than we need them, and we have to do it in a way that leaves them a graceful path to a new arrangement, so that accepting the new reality is easier than fighting it." She looked at me. "The whole thing comes down to one demonstration, one moment where we show them undeniably what they've become dependent on without breaking it, without threatening it, just showing them. And then we offer them a deal so much better than war that they take it gratefully. That's the spring. That's Earth's real final reply, not the words we sent 8 years ago, the thing we're about to do now." The demonstration she designed was elegant, and it was bloodless, and it was the most audacious thing humanity ever did. We were going to turn the Cascade off, for 1 hour, across the entire galaxy, all at once, not as a threat, as a demonstration. A single hour in which the great powers, the apex of the sovereignty, would feel for the first time what it was like to live without the human energy they'd wired their whole civilization to. Not damage, not war. Just 1 hour of darkness, scheduled, announced, brief, and then the lights back on, the Cascade restored, no harm done. 1 hour to make 10,000 years of great powers understand, in their bones, in a way no words ever could, exactly what they'd become dependent on. And then, with that understanding fresh and total, humanity's real offer. The day of the demonstration, I was in the office with Sarah Chen, watching the dependency graph, watching the clock. We'd announced it to the sovereignty's high court in advance. That was crucial. Sarah Chen had insisted. It had to be announced. It had to be clearly a demonstration and not an attack. The message to the high court was careful and humble and utterly calm. The sovereignty has honored humanity by integrating the Cascade into the galactic economy. In gratitude, and in the interest of mutual understanding, Earth will briefly pause Cascade output for 1 hour, beginning at the stated time, so that the sovereignty may fully appreciate the value of the partnership we share. Output will resume automatically after 1 hour. This is a gesture of transparency, that we may understand one another clearly as we discuss the future of our arrangement. The High Court, I'm told, did not take it seriously. Why would they? A minor tributary world announcing a 1 hour pause in its output as a gesture of transparency. It sounded like the small, slightly pretentious gesture of a small world. They noted it and ignored it. They had no idea even then how dependent they'd become. That was the whole point. The demonstration existed precisely because they didn't know. And then the hour came, and Sarah Chen, with a steadiness I'll never forget, gave the order, and humanity turned off the Cascade. I will never forget that hour as long as I live. Across the galaxy, at the apex of the sovereignty, the lights went out. Not on Earth, we kept our own systems running on reserve, of course. But everywhere the Cascade had woven itself into the great powers' economy, which by now was everywhere that mattered, the whole glittering top of the pyramid, the energy simply stopped. For 1 hour. The great power worlds, the ancient ruling worlds of a 10,000-year empire, went dark. Their cities dimmed. Their systems faltered. Their fleets, which ran on the Cascade now, sat powerless in their docks. The apex of galactic civilization, the great old powers who had ruled everything and produced nothing and lived on tribute for 10,000 years, discovered all at once, in a single dark hour, exactly what they had become dependent on. And then 1 hour later, exactly as promised, the Cascade came back on. The lights returned. The fleets powered up. No damage was done. Nothing was broken. It was precisely as humanity had announced, a demonstration 1 hour, bloodless, reversible, complete. But the great powers had felt it now. They had spent 1 hour in the dark their own greed had built, and they understood, finally, what 8 years of taking had made them. They understood that humanity, the minor world they'd taxed, the young species they'd brought to heal, the joke that had rolled over without a fight, held in the Cascade the power to darken the apex of the galaxy whenever it chose. Not by attacking, not with a fleet, just by stopping. By withholding the thing they'd made themselves unable to live without. The High Court convened in emergency session within the hour. And this time, they took humanity's message very, very seriously. And humanity sent its real final reply, the actual decision that changed everything. And it was not a threat, and it was not a demand. It was, exactly as Sarah Chen had designed, an offer. A graceful path to a new arrangement, made so much better than war that the great powers would take it gratefully. The offer was delivered by humanity's envoy to the High Court. And it was Sarah Chen herself who went, finally stepping out of the shadows, the architect of the whole thing, to speak humanity's real reply to the great powers face to face. And what she said is the thing that's carved now in the new Galactic Accords, the words that ended 10,000 years of tribute. "Honored members of the High Court," she said, "you have just experienced 1 hour without the Cascade. I trust it was instructive." She let that sit. "I want to be clear about what just happened and what didn't. We did not threaten you. We did not attack you. We did not damage you in any way. We simply paused for 1 hour the energy that your civilization has come to depend on, energy that only humanity can provide, because the Cascade is not a resource you can seize but a knowledge that only we possess. And then we turned it back on because we are not your enemy and we do not wish you harm." She paused. "But you understand now, as you did not yesterday, what the last 8 years have made true. You demanded that humanity become a productive pillar of your economy. We obliged. And in obliging, we became the foundation your civilization now rests upon. You cannot conquer us, because conquering us means losing the Cascade, and losing the Cascade means the hour you just experienced, but forever. You cannot take what only we can give. For the first time in 10,000 years, the apex of the sovereignty depends on a world it cannot rule by force." The High Court was silent. The great powers, who had never in 10,000 years been spoken to this way by a minor world, listened, because they had just spent an hour in the dark and they had no choice but to listen. "So here is humanity's reply to your tribute demand," Sarah Chen said. "Not the reply we sent 8 years ago, that was a beginning. This is the real one. We are not going to pay you a third of everything, and we are not going to cut you off or threaten you or make war on you or take revenge for 10,000 years of an empire built on taking from the weak. We are going to do something better, something you have no framework for because no one has ever been in a position to offer it to you before." Her voice was clear and certain. "We are going to end the tribute, not just ours, all of it. The whole pyramid. 10,000 years of the strong taxing the weak, the apex consuming what the base produces. It ends. Because we hold the foundation now, and we will provide the Cascade, generously, abundantly, to the whole galaxy, great powers and minor worlds alike, but only into a galaxy that no longer runs on tribute. You want the energy that your civilization now depends on. Then the price is the end of the system that made us and 100 worlds before us into things to be taxed. Free the tributaries, dismantle the pyramid, build a galaxy where worlds trade as equals instead of paying upward forever. Do that and humanity will power your civilization for 10,000 years to come and you will prosper as you never have. Refuse and," she let it hang, "well, you felt the 1 hour. We'd all prefer not to make it permanent, but that is the choice. Not pay or die, the choice you offered us. A better one. Reform or go dark. the most powerful empire in the galaxy, finally given the same arithmetic it spent 10,000 years imposing on everyone else. The great powers did not accept gracefully. I want to be honest about that, because the histories like to skip to the happy ending, and the truth is that the apex of a 10,000-year empire does not simply agree to dismantle itself, because a minor world asks nicely, even after an hour in the dark. They tried to fight first. Of course they did. That was the dangerous moment, the moment Sarah Chen had feared most, when the great powers, faced with the choice of reform or darkness, reached instead for the thing they'd always reached for, force. They moved to seize Earth. They mobilized their fleets, their Cascade-powered fleets, which was its own bitter irony, and they came to take the Cascade by force, to conquer Earth, to install their own administrators and wring the secret of the Cascade out of us. Because surely a thing could be taken if you just applied enough power, the way everything had always been taken for 10,000 years. And they discovered the thing Sarah Chen had built the entire trap around, the thing that made the Cascade different from every resource the sovereignty had ever seized. The Cascade could not be taken. It wasn't a mine you could capture or a factory you could seize. It was a knowledge, a process, a thing that worked only because humanity understood it and chose to run it, and humanity had made very sure over those 8 quiet years that the understanding lived nowhere the sovereignty could reach it. When the great powers' fleets came for Earth, humanity simply turned the Cascade off again, not for an hour this time, indefinitely. And the apex of the galaxy went dark, really dark, lasting dark, the dark of a civilization that had wired itself to a foundation and then tried to smash the foundation. The fleets that came to conquer Earth ran out of power on the way, because they ran on the Cascade, because everything ran on the Cascade now. The great powers tried to take by force the one thing in the galaxy that force could not take, and in the trying, they brought the darkness down on themselves, and they learned, finally, completely, 10,000 years too late to do anything but learn, that there was a kind of power their fleets could not seize. It didn't last long, the fighting, because it couldn't. A war you lose the moment you start it isn't a war. The great powers' attempt to seize Earth collapsed under its own impossibility within days, their darkened fleets stranded, their darkened worlds desperate, and humanity simply waited, lights on, Cascade ready, for the apex of the galaxy to understand that it had no move left but the one Sarah Chen had offered. And then the great powers came back to the table, humbled in a way that 10,000 years had never humbled them, and this time they listened. The negotiations took 2 years, and I won't pretend they were simple or that humanity got everything at once. Dismantling 10,000 years of tribute, freeing hundreds of tributary worlds, rebuilding a galactic economy around trade instead of extraction, that was not a thing you did in an afternoon. It was the work of years, and it was hard, and there were great powers who fought at every step, who tried again and again to find some way to preserve their position, some loophole, some way to keep the pyramid standing. But the fundamental arithmetic never changed, and that was Sarah Chen's masterpiece. The great powers needed the Cascade. The Cascade came only from humanity. And humanity would provide it only into a galaxy without tribute. Every time the negotiation stalled, every time a great power tried to cling to the old system, the arithmetic reasserted itself. The energy your civilization depends on flows only into a free galaxy. There was no way around it. There was no fleet that could solve it, no force that could seize it, no clever maneuver that could escape it. The great powers had spent 10,000 years imposing an arithmetic of pay or die on the weak, and now humanity had imposed an arithmetic of reform or go dark on the strong, and it was exactly as inescapable for them as theirs had been for everyone else. So world by world, concession by concession, the tribute ended. The pyramid came apart. The hundreds of tributary worlds, species who had paid upward for centuries, millennia, who had never once imagined a galaxy without tribute, were freed, one after another, as the price the great powers paid for the energy they could not live without. And here is the thing I am proudest of, the thing that made humanity's reply more than just a clever power grab. We did not take the great powers' place at the top. We could have, that was the thing. When the pyramid came apart, humanity held the foundation, the cascade, the thing everyone needed. We could have simply installed ourselves as the new apex, the new great power that everyone paid tribute to, swapped one master for another with humanity on top. Plenty of voices, even among us, wanted exactly that. We'd won, why not rule? And Sarah Chen, who had architected the whole thing, who held more power in that moment than any human in history, Sarah Chen refused. If we take their place, she said, then we haven't changed anything. We've just become the new them. The pyramid stands with a human face on top, and in 10,000 years some other young species discovers some other cascade and does to us what we did to the great powers, and round it goes forever. That's not winning. That's just becoming the thing we beat. She shook her head. No, we end the pyramid. We don't replace the apex, we remove it. The cascade flows to everyone, equally, great power and minor world alike, and no one pays tribute to anyone, and the galaxy trades as equals, and humanity holds the foundation not as a ruler but as she searched for the word, a trustee. A keeper of the thing everyone needs, who provides it to all and rules over none. That's the only ending that actually changes everything. Anything else is just a new pyramid. And that's what humanity did. We held the cascade not as a weapon and not as a throne but as a trust, provided it to the whole galaxy, freely and equally, and used the leverage it gave us for exactly one thing, ending the tribute system forever, and then letting go of the power that ending it had given us. We had the galaxy in our hands, and we used that grip to build a galaxy where no one's hands could hold it that way again, including our own. I'm old now telling this. Sarah Chen is gone. She lived a long life and an honored one, though she never sought the honor, and to the end she insisted she hadn't done anything heroic, just arithmetic. I didn't beat the sovereignty, she told me once near the end. I just showed them what they'd actually built. They beat themselves the moment they decided to tax the most productive world in the galaxy. I just made sure they noticed before it was too late to matter. But that was Sarah Chen all over. She could end an empire and call it bookkeeping. The galaxy she made is the one my grandchildren grew up in. A galaxy without tribute. Without a pyramid. Without an apex of great powers consuming what the weak produce. Worlds trade as equals now, and the cascade flows to everyone, and humanity holds the foundation as a trust and rules over no one. And it has held, this new arrangement, for longer now than I ever expected it to. Because it turns out a galaxy of equals is more stable than a pyramid of tribute, once someone finally builds it. The great powers are still great in their way, old and accomplished and respected, but they are not masters anymore. No one is. That's the thing that changed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy has no masters. People ask me sometimes about Earth's final reply to the tribute demand. They've heard the phrase, it's famous now, it's in the histories, the decision that changed everything. And they always expect a story about defiance, about humanity standing up to the empire and saying no, about courage and last stands and the brave refusal to bend the knee. That's the story people want. That's the shape they expect a thing like this to have. And I tell them it wasn't like that at all. And the difference is the whole point. Earth's final reply to the tribute demand wasn't no. It wasn't defiance. We didn't have a fleet. Defiance would have just been a quick and noble death. And it wasn't yes, either. It wasn't the surrender it looked like for 8 long, shameful years. Earth's real reply was something cleverer and stranger, and, I think, far more powerful than defiance could ever have been. We looked at the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and instead of fighting it or submitting to it, we understood it better than it understood itself. And we found the one weakness 10,000 years of power had hidden even from the powerful. that an empire built on taking from the productive becomes dependent on the productive, and a thing that depends on you is a thing you have power over, no matter how many fleets it has. The great powers demanded that humanity become essential to their economy, and we said yes, and then we made essential mean exactly what they never understood it to mean. We became the foundation, and then we used the foundation to dismantle the building. And then, when we could have built our own building on the rubble, we chose instead to leave the ground level, where no one stands above anyone else. That was the decision that changed everything. Not a brave refusal, a clever yes and the patience to let it ripen, and the wisdom at the end not to become the thing we'd beaten. The galaxy ran on tribute for 10,000 years, because the strong took from the weak and called it the natural order. And a minor world, with no fleet and one clever economist, ended it, not by becoming strong enough to fight the takers, but by becoming essential enough that the takers needed us, and then using that single moment of leverage to tear down the whole idea of taking, for everyone, forever. They demanded a third of everything we made. We gave them, instead, a galaxy where no one would ever have to give a third of everything again. That was Earth's final reply, and it's the only reply, I think, that could ever truly have changed everything, because defiance just replaces one master with a war, and surrender just keeps the master. But what humanity did remove the idea of masters from the galaxy altogether, not by force. By being, for one crucial moment, the thing the whole pyramid rested on, and then, instead of climbing to the top of it, taking it apart. The great powers thought they were taxing a minor world. They were handing the keys of the galaxy to the one species wise enough to unlock every cage, and then throw the keys away. They demanded a third of everything we made. We gave them, instead, a galaxy where no one would ever have to give a third of everything again, and then we refused to rule it.